Even the most successful people can get stuck. Christina, what would you say to somebody that was trying to figure out how to tell the difference between being stuck and being impatient?
It's a little bit of a case of, the grass is greener. Is the grass actually greener? Or am I struggling with the sacrifices that are required of me to continue on this path?
I also hear this probably more often than any other question, which is I have fear that I'll lose it all. There's always this undercurrent of money and not wanting to lose it all or having to reset. How do you coach people through that?
I usually talk through people around what are the basic cornerstone style that they know they are not willing to let go of. Sometimes the feeling of being stuck shows up in a way that leads people to believe that they aren't equipped to achieve what they had been hoping to achieve. Things aren't working out for them, and they're still very much in a place of wanting to move forward where there's clearly an obstacle in front of them. And so
Welcome to Stuck, a show about changing your life without breaking the bank. I'm Rob Curtis, and I'm joined by my co-host Jamal Stockton. Each week we interview experts to help you build a toolbox of practical, actionable insights to change your career and find fulfillment on your terms. Today we're joined by Christina Villarreal, one of Silicon Valley's most respected executive coaches. Christina's coaching clients make high-stakes decisions with confidence. We wanted to talk with her today because even the most successful people can get stuck. And one of the roles of a coach is to help us to identify patterns, to unpick them, to look at the world in a different way. I'm really excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Rob.
Welcome, Christina.
Thank you, Jamal.
So, Christina, you've coached a lot of people over the years. And I'm curious to understand what you have learned from your executive coaching about clients that are kind of stuck and unable to move forward in their career.
These are great questions to think through and talk through today. I would say largely a lot of the work that I do with people is helping them think through, reflect upon how they've arrived at this place where they've begun to experience this feeling of being stuck, not knowing what to move towards, being very unclear on what the next chapter of their life should be or can be, given how they got to the place where they are now. And a big part of it, there are no right or wrong answers for people. And coaching is a place where they're coming in to reflect upon this moment in their professional and personal lives from an objective place, a place where they want to engage in increasing their curiosity, being open to learning new paths so that they can move forward and feel invested in whatever direction that might take them to.
And do people know that they're stuck? Or is that your job to say, hang on a second, I think maybe you're stuck?
People's self-awareness about where they are in their life and their readiness for change really varies. Sometimes the feeling of being stuck shows up in a way that leads people to believe that they aren't equipped to achieve what they had been hoping to achieve. Things aren't working out for them, and they're still very much in a place of wanting to move forward where there's clearly an obstacle in front of them. And so they may not be specifically aware that they're stuck outside of them really struggling to move forward on the path that they had intended to move towards. So coaching can be a place where our conversations encourage people to, not just look forward on the path that they had been intending to move towards, but also in other directions, trying to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, see how their evolution to this particular date may mean that they're taking an adjacent pathway as opposed to the next step that they had intended to achieve. So yeah, definitely there's a lot of reflection happening, and ideally a place where they can rebuild a new narrative that better serves them than feeling like they're standing in front of a closed and locked door. It's really different for a lot of different people. Firsthand what that feeling can be like. Maybe this is a good time to take a moment and share now what that felt like for you.
Oof, being stuck. I think I thought that I was stuck when I finished my last job and spent the last year trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. But with a lot of reflection, I realized that I was stuck a lot earlier than that, and I didn't really know who to talk to. Running my last company, Daylight, was an incredible opportunity, and we didn't know that at the time. We were throwing ourselves at this kind of largely intractable systemic problem. We weren't getting the results that we wanted, and I walked into this thinking this was going to be fantastic, really enjoyable. I was going to love it. I was finally applying myself to something that I cared about. But the fact of the matter is that most days were a grind. Juggling all of these things was really, really, really exhausting. And I think there were times when I'd look around and I'd say to myself, this is not what I thought I was signing up for. But like, my friends had invested in the business. When invested had trusted me with their money. And the last thing I really felt like I was able to do was to say, hang on, maybe this isn't a good fit. So I'd say for me, it was everything from like dreading coming into work on Sunday nights. I had digestion and appetite problems. I put on weight. I wasn't sleeping well. I was stressed all the time. I was disengaging. And so, like, my body was trying to tell me things. My job publicly was to be an advocate. So I had to be constantly putting on a smiling face. So I'd say I was really caught between, like, what I thought the world needed of me in that moment and what I needed for myself. And there was just a really, really big difference between those two things.
So lots of obligation to wear a lot of different hats, show up for people in a lot of different ways, and feeling like you couldn't change your mind about those commitments.
I think obligation's a pretty good word. I had so many obligations, financial and personal, that it didn't feel like I had a path to move forward. And I think it was kind of crazy to figure that out only recently, that it had been going on for 4 years of my last job.
This is a tough one. I'm gonna break mine into three pieces. I think the very first one that I lived with probably for the longest amount of time was the need to assimilate into another culture. Meaning every day it was difficult. I look in the closet, I'm like, those clothes aren't mine, but I've got to put them on and go to work. And that was okay while you're trying to make money, because there's just a necessity to life that you've got to achieve some sort of financial freedom before you can make decisions, or so I thought. I think that the next one for me, number two, was my intellectual curiosity peaked, and I felt like I was no longer being challenged from an intellectual standpoint. This is very tough as an introvert who seeks knowledge and curiosity as their main driver. But in the money business, which I was in, there's only so much curiosity you can have for something that matters, but also doesn't matter at the same time. And so I asked myself the question, when's the last time you were really intellectually curious? And I was 20 years old studying power generation, and we were deriving out of the thermonuclear power equations to solve the energy crisis in California. And that was the last time I stretched my mind. And then from that point forward, it was a lot of rinse and repeat, but not a lot of growth intellectually. Not to say that you're not learning and gaining knowledge, but the stretching piece had gone away. And then the third thing that really did it for me was I lost admiration for the people that were more senior than me. That was a really tough one to face, which was, I don't want to be like that person. I don't want to die in this building and have my last, jaunt here be a clock in a retirement party. And I'm like, there's got to be something more to this. And it's not a reflection of people's personality or by any means to say something about someone else's character. You're just saying, I don't want to be that person. There's nothing there for me. And that's when I was like, I've got to do something else.
Yeah, super interesting. You touched on a lot of really important things that over time is where people feel a deep sense of loss of motivation. First being the inability to be authentic in your true self, in your workplace, diminishment of curiosity and learning from the work that you're doing. It didn't have meaning to you. It was no longer personally interesting to you. And then without that role model of leadership to see where the worth it factor was even there, if you were to continue to discipline yourself and to stick it out, that was no longer there either. And so with all of those things being present, it's no wonder that you needed to take a step back and ask yourself what different direction would allow you to come into those things that you were missing.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly it. Yeah, it's a trifecta.
And like, Jamal, were you just white knuckling it? I knew that I was throwing myself at a problem that was really, really difficult to solve, and yet I had this massive valuation to hit, and so I was just white knuckling it through. I was literally just getting through day by day. And I can look back in hindsight and be grateful that that chapter drew to a close, because as fun as it was, I don't know that my body could have gone through another 6 months of that business, if I'm really honest.
Yeah, I mean, white knuckles is probably a fair statement, but I think I replaced it with a passion for helping other people, right? So if I wasn't going to be fulfilled, I think the answer then became, how can I help others fulfill their objectives and their goals? And so you put it into people. That's where the passion went. And that's only sustainable for so long before you've got to help yourself.
Absolutely. And coming to that realization, what I like to do is encourage people to take inventory of what meaningful assets or relationships can they take with them once they've discovered a new direction that they want to move towards. Usually a place that you've been diligently investing in, there's things you want to take with you and there are things you want to leave behind. And the opportunity to help people, the opportunity to develop those relationships before resetting makes a lot of sense.
If I may kind of reflect a little bit on the process of getting unstuck, because I was sitting in this level of doubt, and I learned that over time I let go of a lot more of that experience than I thought I would, and decided to carry with me some very specific and very special parts. But I'm guessing that's probably a common experience.
It is a common experience, but it can be a confusing time. And what I heard you just talk through is this phase of that time where you were taking inventory of what you had an appetite for. You'd come to realize what you'd lost your appetite for. And then the question becomes, is there any of this that you want to carry on with, or do you want to completely reset? And part of that process, I think, is really critical to getting your next direction correct, because it allows you to cycle through with more detail and more self-awareness of what feels right and what are you ready to let go of. And it can create a sense of stability to, rather than cut ties and do a total 180, to kind of take some things with you along the way, reassess, reset, and then follow that signal. And it sounds like that's where you got to where you are now.
Yeah, and a lot of experimentation. I mean, incubated a legal tech business. I've consulted with a bunch of people, and the piece that I decided to take away is my communication and storytelling skills, which was actually one of the greatest things that I brought to daylight. But yeah, it was hard earned. There was no right answer, and there was not even a lot of people to talk to. I mean, I'm really grateful that I had Jamal, because he was going through a kind of similar process yourself, weren't you, Jamal?
Getting unstuck was pretty difficult, and kind of making that transition was hard. I think calling Rob was one of the first things I did after probably about a 2-month period where I entertained other jobs that were in the same field, because I started to fall back to, well, I already know how to do this, and I'm really good at navigating the corporate world, and maybe I'll go take this executive position over here. And then I was like, I'll be stuck again in the same spot I was in. So having Rob help me with the question, I think that was probably going to answer most of this for me, which was, how do you become an entrepreneur? Because I think the thing for me was, how do I set myself free to take control over my own day? And the best way to do that is by managing and having control over your own business. I didn't want to be an employee anymore, and have other people dictate what my day looked like and tell me what to do, think, and feel. And so that was really the first step for me, Rob, was calling you for somebody that's already been successful at doing it.
I love hearing that. And it sounds like that work experience that you recognized was no longer right for you, it was specifically those experiences that allowed you to see your readiness to be your own boss, to create your own path, and be a role model towards what you wanted to achieve next. But it's that letting go process of recognizing what was no longer going to serve you, and being the motivation to drive you to do very difficult things.
Yeah, I mean, you got it, right? It's coming to that realization. For me, it was like, you're a leader. I don't want to be led anymore. I got to step away from this.
We decided this show is about personal finance, and change through the lens of personal finance rather than change through the lens of what I think of as live, laugh, love. Because the reality is that I think people in our age bracket experience are that we don't have unlimited choices, or we don't feel like we have unlimited choices. And perhaps our responsibility set is a lot higher these days than it used to be. I've got a husband, I've got a child on the way, got a nice lifestyle that I enjoy. And so we really wanted to kind of talk about the realities of making a change. And each week we get a listener who writes us a question or sends a voice note. And I want to read out a question that we've had from one of our listeners because I think you'll be able to give them really great advice. So the question is this. Hi, Rob and Jamal. I saw your trailer and it hit a little harder than expected. I work as a management consultant and our industry is taking a beating, which is putting a strain on stuff at work and at home, and becoming a partner feels a lot less interesting than it used to. It's probably time to make a shift, but I'm really worried about the practicalities and I can't figure out if I'm just feeling impatient today and overreacting or if I'm really stuck and it's time to make a move. Christina, what would you say to somebody that was trying to figure out how to tell the difference between being stuck and being impatient?
It's a little bit of a case of, the grass is greener. Is the grass actually greener? Or am I struggling with the sacrifices that are required of me to continue on this path? And that is a place that I've talked with a lot of people through. So sometimes it's, what are you exchanging your problems for, right? Because there's very few paths in life that don't come along with some compromises, some sacrifices, some heavy weights, challenges along the way. But it is a good time to think through, what is it that you don't want to let go of? And so in this person's question, I'm hearing from them, they're feeling the real pain of, probably the lifestyle of being a consultant, the highs and lows, and wondering if the upside is actually worth it. Right. So I would ask the question, that upside that was important to you, that you thought was going to be the motivation for you to withstand, whatever challenges are on the path of being a consultant, are you willing to let go of that upside? If you are moving away from being a consultant, because whatever path you choose next, you want to make sure that that upside is available to you on that path as well. Or maybe that upside is no longer that carrot. So we may be talking about lifestyle, the financial means to live a particular lifestyle in the exact way that they've been living. That would be the question that I would explore with them, which is how tightly are you motivated to hold on to that upside that the lifestyle of a consultant provides for you? Because whatever path you choose next should be really clearly able to provide those upsides for you as well, but maybe with an exchange of whatever problems that being a consultant was creating.
Yeah, I get the sense that management consulting is being really heavily disrupted by AI. And like a lot of senior people that I'm talking to at the moment are saying, well, I don't even know if the industry is going to exist in 3 years' time. And so I think, the question about what the upside is going to be for a partner or a management consulting firm, I think is a really big question right now. So it's kind of, I think it's naturally a pretty stressful place to be, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And it could be that their particular skill set in consulting was no longer at the forefront of opportunities for them. And sometimes the more difficult things that organizations require relate to the people and change manage, supporting people through becoming increasingly better equipped to work through change. And the people is always the messy part. It's no longer apply the framework, rinse and repeat. Sit down and, talk through managing conflict and, layoffs and things like that. Yeah, I think, there's a lot there. But resetting can be a difficult time considering what technology is replacing.
Christina, I have a follow-up question because I also hear this probably more often than any other question, which is I'm scared or I have fear that I'll lose it all. So going back to your lifestyle point, right? There's always this undercurrent of money and not wanting to lose it all or having to reset. How do you coach people through that?
We're talking about risk.
Mm-hmm.
And people's appetite for risk and people's tools that they have to drive forward the gains that they were planning on benefiting from in terms of lifestyle. So that risk, I usually talk through people around like what are the kind of basic cornerstones of lifestyle that they know they are not willing to let go of. Right. Living in a particular city or, metropolitan area. Maybe it's that, maybe it's, disposable income. Some people know that they might really struggle with spending less on particular aspects that they've had in their life. Those are the really hard questions that I talk with people about. So the first thing is like, what would be your kind of minimal ability to live in your life financially that's going to be, there's kind of the nice to have and the need to have. I encourage people to take inventory of those things and also be willing to like bring in flexibility, right? Anytime you're resetting around finances, I always encourage people to ask themselves, this is a good time. You're not the same version of yourself that you were 5 years ago. You might have more flexibility. How urban of a lifestyle you believe you need to have. Rob, you're a great example as someone who has lived in a lot of different cities, a lot of different lifestyles, even different countries. A lot of Americans have lived in just a handful of places, let alone regions, let alone countries. And so encouraging people to become a little more flexible there, test hypotheses that they have believed were written in stone, and see what they can change in order for them to be a little more comfortable with risks and change.
Yeah, I moved to Mexico City the day the Silicon Valley Bank went bankrupt because it was a tough day. And I was like, if I'm going to be doing this, I might as well be doing this not from Hell's Kitchen where everything costs me $1 million. And that, like, I think maybe that idea of like trade-offs, I swapped a pretty rich social circle for one that's a lot smaller. And of course, I didn't speak the language yet. I've done a lot of work on that. But like, there's a lot of risk that this all starts to sound too hard and like there's not a light at the end of the tunnel there. But like, that was a pretty good trade-off for me. Yes, I didn't quite have as much time with friends and I needed to do that digitally. But actually, I was able to save my money. I was able to spend more conservatively and buy myself the time that I needed. Because that was an incredible investment in my future, but I sure as hell could not have done that from Hell's Kitchen. But it did involve some sacrifices. That's the reality of it. But I tell you what, I'm really glad that I took them.
Yeah, wow. I mean, just reinventing yourself in so many ways, it sounds like was a big part of you rediscovering the activities, the places, the people that were going to fulfill you. I mean, some of the things that you mentioned would not really be as readily accessible in Hell's Kitchen in New York City. But it was the trade-off, the communities, the accessibility to urban environment, the proximity of all of those things that New York provided. You were willing to test to see you be happy in a very different setting, a very different lifestyle. And sounds like it's worked out. And I'm glad to hear it.
So far, so good.
Yeah, so far, so good. So Jamal, did you stay
Yeah.
in the same city?
No, so yeah, before I left my job,
Okay.
we bought another house.
Wow.
And yeah, so we bought another house in the Berkshires and then started to put together basically an exit strategy out of my old job. And then once I decided to leave, it was very clear. Like I sold the condo in the city before I left the job and then moved into the house. And then once we were done with all of that stuff, then I was like, okay, I can leave the job. So I was able to transition out of corporate that way.
Yeah, so you had a real exit plan that
Yeah.
was multi-tiered, so
Yeah.
you could build up the security that made it felt like less risk.
You got it. Yeah.
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 Which is
So,
really tough to do. I mean, it's one thing to come to the place where you're ready to make a decision
mhm.
to change.
Yeah.
Then what I often do with coaching is then talk through what's the plan.
Yeah. So I'm a strategist. So I wrote down on a whiteboard a strategy my wife and I did about what we were going to do. So we got really tactical about things like where do we want to live? What does the future look like? What's in our future? And how much money do we need? So our living room looked like a little bit like an office space for about a week and a half. And the first thing we did was develop that exit strategy, realizing we needed another place to live. So at the point at which we made the decision, we actually went and bought another house. That was the very first thing. Then after we bought the house, we had to figure out, well, how do we transition out of the city that we're in? So we need a timeline and the right date to actually sell our current property to kind of get the most money we could out of that particular property to transition into the new life. But this wasn't slow. This took about 2 years. So I'm sorry, it was slow. It took about 2 years. It wasn't quick. then once we were able to sell that property, then I felt like I was in a position where I could start to wind down in my current job and really think about exiting. So for me, it was really that strategy is just more about withdrawal and kind of figuring out what you're going to do next. Even though we didn't have a perfect plan for what was next, I knew it was I'm going to be an entrepreneur in some sort of fashion, but I need the time and bandwidth to think, right? And so even baked into my plan was 6 months of relaxation.
Mm.
Yeah, so do nothing was part of the plan, so
Wow.
I could reflect. Yeah, so it was very detailed, even giving myself those time frames, like 6 months for this, another 6 months for that, 3 months to do this, etc.
So you really built in, it sounds like, this exchange of resources, an exchange of how you were using your time to optimize putting that next foot forward. And it sounds like you had a great partner in your spouse to talk through what that might look like. And would you say that you guys were different in your like appetite for risk or risk taking approach, or how did that look? That's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is very important when you're talking to a partner. But the best thing for me is, my partner was like, "You do you, boo." So
Same.
You are very lucky.
yeah. But I've also had a history, and I don't mean to make this braggadocious, but I've been successful in planning and strategizing my entire life. And so if there was something that was going to be done next, it was going to be well thought out. And it was trust the process.
Hmm.
And honestly, it's worked, and it's actually worked remarkably in a way I wouldn't have thought of. I feel more successful today than I ever have in my career.
That's wonderful. And it sounds like that track record was what gave her enough insight to trust you.
Yeah, and for everybody, honesty, right? How you're feeling, why you're feeling the way that you're feeling, being open about it. Everything, all the hallmarks of a good relationship were already there, so that trust was built so that we could have the conversation, which is a topic maybe for another episode, which is just trust building in a relationship.
Yes. And making hard decisions together, and staying aligned through what the values of the relationship are, and the mission that you have as a couple and a family.
Yeah, you got it.
You know, what I notice about different kinds of people who come to me for coaching is even if they do have a strong and extensive network, some of the most difficult parts of getting unstuck and moving forward is the feeling of insecurity and difficulty in admitting you're not in a good place and you want to be someplace different. You know, how it is in Silicon Valley, and a lot of high achieving people who have been high achieving for so much of their life, it can be a very difficult thing to admit, that they want to be someplace different, that maybe they need to go down a different path. And sometimes it can be hard to find other people who can appreciate that and who are driven by different motivators other than maybe money or status, or particular industries, finance being one of them. It can be really difficult to change directions and then therefore find a different community that values different things. So sometimes people have these great, strong communities, but those communities may not value the different direction that that individual might be interested in pursuing. So sometimes there's some, in the same way that it takes people some time to move in different directions professionally, sometimes it means like finding new communities that support those directions as well. And certainly the older you get, the more isolated you can become, because we can become so siloed in the directions of the lives that are taken, in the direction that our lives have taken.
Yeah, I guess like
Christina,
Jamal and I both worked on financial inclusion work, and like that is a predominant focus on people who are living on the breadline and a lot of financial, like folks who are in a precarious financial situation. And I remember when Jamal called me and he wanted to run a business, like our personal brands did not allow us to engage with things like greed and individualism.
Christina, you said something that really hit home for me, which was probably the hardest thing during the transition for me, which was letting go of the ego.
Mm.
Because it felt like so much of what my role or purpose was listening to my ego, and my job felt like power and ego, and it's this constant battle with other people around power and ego. And I felt like I was losing my soul. And it was very hard in that transition period to stop listening to that voice that's saying success is X because it equals this much money or this position. When in fact, when you kind of peek behind the curtain, success wasn't there for me because power and ego didn't fulfill that piece of me. So
Right.
almost 6 months to 9 months, maybe even a year, was just like stop listening to that voice. Do you find that other people go through a similar struggle looking for that new community or the thing that might feed their soul?
You absolutely spoke to something that's a big part of this process, which is, where are people feeling pride
Hmm.
in their work? And a lot of what people do when they've worked hard to achieve certain titles, positions, degrees, opportunities, is a sense of pride in how that position and how that opportunity reflects their intelligence, their skill level, their work ethic, their abilities. And to step away from that position might feel like a sacrifice or a giving up of that recognition, particularly when we have titles and roles that our families and our communities celebrate and put up on a pedestal. It can be difficult because you feel like you're going to lose that. But what I try to do is encourage people to see the work ethic, the skill, the muscle memory that went in to earning that opportunity, and helping people see that they are taking those things with them.
Mm.
Right. Years ago, I had a couple of friends who were listening to Serena Williams, the professional tennis athlete, and one of the interviews that she did around the difficulty of moving on from being a professional tennis athlete, right? And like, how will all of those years and skill development serve her in something entirely different, right? But my first thought was, they'll translate perfectly. Like all of that work ethic, all of that judgment, all of the sacrifice, all of those things can translate into new directions and give you that same sense of pride without sacrificing, all of the abilities that you've earned to get there. It just means that you're applying them in new ways, right? In the same way that Rob is still communicating, he's just learning to do so in a different language, in a different community, with different goals. But clearly, he's making it work for himself. And so I'm just so proud of all that he has done to reinvent himself and land in a place that is better and more fulfilling.
One of the things that I described with my last job is like, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And I was so frustrated. I'm a competitive person. I like when things go well, but I was super frustrated. And it was so easy at various times throughout this entire journey to take the easy path and just shout at the world. It's sometimes hard to adopt a growth mindset, and it's really easy to fall into anger, frustration, just to be stuck at the very beginning of Kubler-Ross, Like, denial's great, but anger's a really fun place to stick around in. And letting go of that was what helped me get into a growth mindset. But like, I guess a lot of people come to you angry, frustrated, they've been passed over, they've lost their jobs. Like, how do you talk to somebody that's like in it, there in the moment, and maybe they're focusing on the negative side of things rather than trying to look for silver linings in their situation?
It's a really interesting point. A big part of people's readiness to change and get unstuck is their need to take full inventory of how exactly they believe they failed. And failure is so subjective, right? And it can have so many different narratives around how a person has gotten to a particular outcome. Oftentimes, people come in with a very clear definition of their failure, of how they set out to achieve a particular thing. And, as you're talking about being an entrepreneur, Rob, I mean, I think what's also difficult to grapple with is how necessary it is for a founder to believe that they can achieve. But when you look at the data, right, like,
You've got to be crazy.
a lottery ticket chance, if even, to be that outlier. But you have to believe that you're capable of being that outlier to be a founder. And yet, when the outcome of a business idea and a plan and all of that doesn't work out, it can be hard to then put yourself back in the comparison group of most companies fail. right? Or at least in that particular iteration. The company fails, the founder doesn't necessarily need to end there, right? The founder can say that business iteration failed. I am not a failure. I am not going to continue to fail because I am taking that learning, I'm applying it in new directions. I'm taking inventory of what I learned in order to reset and move on. And a big part of that is redefining the failure, separating out where one's responsibility is, doing that, hindsight, retrospective, to look at what they might do differently, because that does count, right? It's an experiment. And if you haven't taken inventory of the results, those results will not serve you to move forward to make a better, next experiment.
And so, like, you're in the moment and just seeing red. You're like, just
Rage.
feeling it.
Yeah.
This thing has happened to me.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, all of the lovely rationalization and reflection that you've described is probably not at that moment. So what do you advise? Just like take a deep breath, do nothing, let the emotions pass?
I have a huge appetite for big emotions. Love to see it. I am there for it. Lots of humor and pettiness can come into those conversations, and they're important and great to get it all out. And emotions are a normal human response that tell us important information about who we are, about the truth that we bear, that we witness in different experiences. So no, the emotion, we have to make space for that. Right. So we have to speak to it. We have to let it out. We have to work through it before we can move on and get to a place where we're willing to move beyond the emotion, like Jamal said, and be really ready to step into a new strategy. Because without that strategy, you're just repeating the same thing. But certainly taking time for the emotion, critical step on the journey.
Yeah. Christina, I threw a little dance party when I left. I did. I think I was playing Celebrate and I was dancing around the house.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And yeah, that's it's important because we're human and we need to process all the highs and lows and get it out. And without that, like I said, it can be hard to make a clean start. It's interesting. Literally just today read in my social media feed some ancient philosopher who said something like, patience is the best antidote to anger, or time passing, something like that. But I do think to make a decision in the heat of a strong emotional response, probably not the best timing, right? And some people really struggle with impulsivity. Very rarely do people make impulsive decisions, that work out optimally. Sometimes they do by chance, but, some people, like I said, do struggle with impulsive decision making, impulsive reactions. They can get the best of all of us, but taking a beat, taking a moment to let yourself step aside from immediate, unchangeable behaviors. I do try to encourage people to do that first. Sometimes it's so far gone when they have been holding their breath through an emotional time that an impulsive decision can get the best of them. And then, you do what you can to take inventory to make the most of it from there. But certainly impulsivity in the face of strong emotion is a bit of a recipe for disaster.
That's huge. I remember that exact feeling of just maintaining positivity, knowing that it was going to be all right, regardless of whatever you're going to try to do. And then always keeping it professional. There's nothing happening that's so bad that you need to freak out, unless it is. And that's a different scenario. That's not being stuck. That's a serious issue. But for most people, this is just about change.
I hear what you're saying, feeling positive all the way through, and I think, but Jamal, there must have been part of you somewhere along the way that was that had some other emotions other than positivity, or did you just jump straight through from denial to negotiation?
No, I mean, I'm human just like you guys. There's frustration, a little bit of anger. I don't really dwell in anger. I mean, frustration's an emotion I hold on to when something doesn't change. Ultimately, disappointment is probably the emotion I held on to the most. That lingered for a very long time, realizing that there wasn't something there that I wanted. And I was extremely disappointed. That was legitimate. And that probably lasted a few months.
You said something to me that's kind of stuck with me. You said something about whether people are really willing to take the risks necessary to make their life nicer and happier, or the kinds of life that they want. Because some people seem to want those things without doing the work.
Right. I think it's we live in a world where people want to live with results because they see it so prolifically around them because of social media, because we are now more connected than ever. And so people can mistake that appetite for results with work ethic and consistency because big careers, big achievements, they don't just happen in a moment or a highlight. They actually require consistency and sacrifice and work ethic. And I think that's where people don't necessarily see behind the results that are so easily accessible because of how connected we all are.
One of my former investors described to me the importance of just spending a year saying no. But like understanding yourself as a process of elimination feels different to understanding yourself as a process of reflection. And I think actually by saying no more than yes at the beginning, it gave me just that little bit of extra time to make sure that what I committed myself to, which I always commit myself to like 1,000%, was the right thing.
Great advice. And I know Charles Hudson, he is a fantastic investor. So hats off to that advice to you. And I really do believe that clearing your plate and clearing your slate is an important part of taking inventory to move forward. But there's also, for some people, like choosing things that you can do in the meantime before a bigger commitment that allow you to get some reps in, clear your head out as a temporary way to regain your footing, rebuild your confidence, give you clarity. So it sounds like for you, trying on some different hats along the way that allowed you to engage in activities in a temporary way gave you some insight as to what was going to be right.
Yeah, I mean, to use some corporate speak, I thought it was a waterfall project where I had to define a really clear outcome at the end and get there. Like, what's the perfect version of me? When in practice, actually, it was a lot more agile. It was iterative. I needed to try a gay bank and realize that I didn't want to do that. And then I needed to try consulting in this thing and realize it didn't float my boat. I was a Spanish student who did nothing other than sometimes not go to class. That wasn't obviously going to be a thing. And so it became this kind of iterative process of self-discovery.
And for you, Jamal, like what allowed you to get to a place where you were ready to take on a new identity for yourself professionally? Because that was a big leap between these roles. It's a really big, different identity. What do you think helped you get there?
It spent a lot of time on clarity of purpose. So I asked a lot of existential questions, which we probably don't want to get into here. But I spent that 6 months just asking some serious questions.
Like what?
About like who you are, identity questions, who you wanted to be when you were younger versus what you had to be as an adult in order to survive. And can I now go back to being who I wanted to be? Because again, I have the financial freedom to be able to do that. So much of what we have to do is because of money.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that's just the nature of our society. But if you have money, the question is, what would you do? And then it's ultimately a purpose question, which is what is the thing that drives you? And that's how you land on, I need to be my own boss. I need to be an entrepreneur. I need more genuine, honest time with my family. Which means I need control over my life when I need to be where I need to be. And it didn't really matter what it was, right? It didn't matter what the business was, so long as those other things were a priority in my life. Because what you begin to realize also, I think at this level, is you can do anything.
My last stated purpose was to close the LGBT wealth gap. When I went home at the end of the day, was that what my purpose was? I thought for a long time it was. And then I came to realize that no, it was a way for me to find purpose in what I was doing, to ride through all of the ups and downs of that. But actually my personal purpose is very different. It's a lot more close to home. It's about my community and my family, and probably something about how we all face a rapidly changing economy filled with AI. Like, that's the stuff I want to talk about. That's the stuff I want to do. But it took me a long time to separate that purpose I had found strategically to help motivate myself at work and to motivate others, but then to let go of that and to realize that that's not something that I want to invest more of my time in, and to find peace, not only with that for myself, but with my peers, to say, look, that was a period of my time, and that my purpose, or my mission, maybe, I don't know what the word to use is going to be different going forward. Was that the same for you, Jamal? You did a lot of work that was very purposeful in your last role.
Yeah, I mean, that kept me sustained for a long time, Rob, right?
Yep.
mainly because my family was impacted by the very problem that I was trying to solve. So that'll keep you going night and day, which it did, 80 hours a week for 2 or 3 years straight. But in the end, that's unsustainable, especially when you come to realize what the actual problem is that you're facing. That was a kind of another pen drop moment for me, which was what is actually the reason behind these gaps, and whether it be race or culture. And you're like, I can't fix that problem. And the problem is greed. It's human nature.
Mm.
So helping people, again, will sustain you, but eventually you just got to help yourself.
Yeah, really, really interesting points. Yeah, it's really interesting points. Like what I hearing you just share now, Jamal, it was like thinking through all the choices that we have at different time periods of our life, for both of you. And when we talk about purpose, like our purpose can be different in response to different life experiences, different, different junctures in our life, right? Like our earliest self was driven by a particular experience based on, who we are and our personality and life experiences. And that prompts us to make certain decisions that take us in certain directions. But, part of the journey along the way is recognizing you've had your fill there. Your curiosity about that particular direction has been met. When I think about my purpose, like I continue to have a deep fascination and curiosity about people, and my purpose to serve that curiosity and serve that fascination can be met in different ways. I truly enjoy helping people meet their full potential. I enjoy helping people generate effective solutions. Early on, I had such a deep fascination in people, to help them through emotional experiences. But you can take that curiosity and take it through different directions in your life, to recognize that your purpose can shift gears over time for a myriad of different things that are inside your control and outside of your control. But to allow yourself to redefine it and get closer to the thing that is more accurate in your particular stage of life is a really important part of that reinvention process, and to getting to a place where you feel genuinely satisfied with where you are. Absolutely.
So, Christina, what's one thing that our listeners can do? What could they write down to prompt themselves to begin this journey of change?
I always encourage people to take a step back from their current circumstances and ask themselves to return to a place of finding motivation, connecting with their curiosity. And so asking the question, it's a beginning of a year, what more do you want to learn? What more do you want to see? What more do you want to experience? What more do you want to do? Like answering some of these very practical and specific questions, more clear picture will begin to emerge if people are feeling unclear about what next steps are meant for them.
Have you ever had a book or a piece of inspiration or a poem or something that's inspired you?
I have had a lot of clients who enjoy the resource. I believe it's called the Daily Stoic. Stoicism as a general framework to, be served with those prompts as a resource for getting more clarity. I direct people to that. I've seen a lot of people get their footing through learning about Stoicism.
Super, super interesting. Thank you,
Fantastic.
Christina.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Christina, as always, you've been wonderful. You're somebody that means a lot to me personally, professionally, and I'm really, really excited that Jamal and I could have you on to help us kind of explore this topic for our listeners today, many of whom are going to hopefully see some patterns in the things that we've described that maybe look a little bit different for them. So we really, really appreciate for the time that you spent with us. And for those of us, or those of our listeners that are trying to find somebody that can give them sage advice like you, where can they find Christina?
You can find me on my website, Dr. Christina Villarreal. Deep mindset coaching, a great way to reach out. I always encourage people to have conversations with a range of different kinds of people. An executive coach like me with my background in training is one specific type, But at the end of the day, it really is about fit and finding chemistry with someone that you feel like you can trust, be safe with, in order to create the changes that are going to allow you to be happier in your life.
Fantastic. Thank you. We'll put the website link in the show notes and in the Substack email that goes out with this episode. So if you haven't subscribed, find us on Substack. Stuck is a 213 Studios production. It's produced by myself, Rob Curtis, Jamal Stockton, and Jimena de Tijera. It helps us a lot if you subscribe, leave a comment, a review, recommend us to a friend. And if Christina said something that's inspired you today and you've got any comments or questions, please either send us an email or in particular a voice note. We'd love to hear your lovely dulcet tones. You can send those to stuck@213 Studios. That's 213 the numbers and the word studios.com. Thank you, everybody. We will see you all tomorrow for the second episode of the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you, Jamal and Rob.
You can also follow our journey and get weekly insights by subscribing to our Substack newsletter. And don't forget to follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Until next time, remember, it's never too late to make a change.